Yeah. Beseder. We're continuing unit number 1 of our Shmita units. Last time, we learned all about the reasons why we keep Shmita, all different ta'amim that were given over the generations, and discussed them and the need of ta'amim and our ta'amim reasons or ta'amim flavors. We mentioned that as well, right? We went through all that last time. We're continuing unit number 1. The menucha of Sir Naim Dangur and Sir Moses Montefiore. As I said, we're also going to go to Mishkan Shananim. We're going to start intermittently. I'll fill you in on that for those who missed later on. Yeah. We'll get to We'll explain after. One of the interesting points we ended up with last time was the question of, is Shmita something that we need? Is part of the goal of Shmita to allow the land to get a rest? Now, if you want to allow the land, we discussed the Rambam and right. If we see in the pages here, right, the Rambam and then the Abarbanel and the Kli Yakar argued with the Rambam about, doesn't make sense to say, this is on page 5 of the unit 6, that area. Does it make sense to say that the goal of Shmita is to give the land a break? The other option is to kick Am Yisrael out of Eretz Yisrael, and then others can come work the land. Part of the answer is a historical one. They can, but they didn't, apparently, which raised the question of, is that just something they're incapable of doing? It's not so clear. Of course, this also reminds us of the other end. Bezrat Hashem, in quite a while, we're going to get to the issue of Heter Mechira, where we sell the land to Goyim. And does that work halachically? But more fundamentally, if the point is to give the land a break, that doesn't really give the land a break. So does that really defy the purpose and the point? So I want to go back to the Psukim and see how that works from there, and then see a few sugyot that pertain to this. Let's go back to the Psukim in Behar. I put them out of here again on page 7. Vayikra Perek Kafei Deber B'nei Yisrael V'amarta Alehem, page 7. Ki tavo la'aretz asher noten lachem v'shaveta ha'aretz Shabbat la'Hashem. So who needs to rest? The land. שש שנים תזרע שדך, שש שנים תזמור כרמך, ואספת את טבעותיו, בשנה השביעית שבתון יהיה לארץ. Right? שבת להשם, שדך לא תזרע הוא the person. כרמך לא תזמור, again the person, ספירה קצרך לא תקצור, וזרע לא תבצור, all these are the person. שנת שבתון יהיה לארץ, והייתה שבת הארץ. Right? So there are 2 ways of reading these psukim. I said 3 ways. I mean, it even says Aleph Bet Gimel there, so I can't lie. There are 3 ways of reading the psukim. We'll note all the green ones. It's good that they're highlighted. I have to check in the Sefer Torah if it's also green and red. I don't know, but all the green bits seem to indicate that the land needs to rest. The red ones seem to indicate that the person needs to refrain from doing malacha. There are 3 ways of understanding what's going on here. One way is to say, the point is for the land to rest. The way to achieve this is by us refraining from malacha. But the point is the land resting, right? And then this would be in the same structure, the classic klal ufrat klal structure that says the rule is, right? The idea is, the concept is Shabbat haaretz. The way we apply it is by our refraining from work, right? That's one way of saying it. Another way of saying it is the exact opposite. To say, really, it's all about the person. And the person has to refrain from work. Now, what does that end up looking like? It looks like you're giving the land a rest. It's not that there's a point in giving the land a rest. That's just the way it ends up looking. Third option is to say there are 2 totally separate things going on here, and they're both required. Right? The land needs to rest, and you need to rest. If we looked at the reasons we gave earlier, right? The Rambam says the land needs, just 1 second, let's finish this point. We said earlier, the Rambam says the land needs to rest, and the Rambam also said you have to give other people a chance to reap your crops. So they're both true, right? It doesn't. You could say there are 2. The Rambam, or we saw the chinuch brings 3 reasons. The Rambam brings 4 reasons. But so there are several reasons. There are several reasons because there are several different halachot. Just like we say there's shmitat ksafim, right, foregoing our loans. It's a separate din from not planting or reaping our crops. So too, not planting or reaping our crops is a separate halacha from the land needing to rest. So Just one second, Rav Baruch wanted to say something.
I just want to say, and don't forget Shemot, where the V'achlu ev yonei amecha.
Right. Correct. Now, again, that seems to be, right, a goal unto itself, right? Which is separate from, right, when Sefer Shemot, v'achlu.
Right, it's not just a hashlacha, it's something that's ikar to the mitzvah.
Right. It seems to be, I'd say, Shvita Shmetenu Tashta there I think we read the pasuk in a more obvious way, the Chora. The pasuk there seems to say, Shvita Shmetenu Tashta, right? The directive is to Notesh, and the goal is to allow the Vyonei Amcha. Of course, that also implies, and as we're going to learn Unit 8, if I remember correctly, this entails not protecting your crop, not blocking people's ways, opening up the gates, etc. But right, sorry. All right, let's see how this plays out in the Sugyot. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah. This is on page 8. Avodah Zarah Daf Tetvav discusses things that you can allow to happen with your belongings on Shabbos, on Shmita. The context there, the beginning of Avodah Zarah discusses before the time of the Goyish holidays that they celebrate. We're not allowed to help them, give them things that will help their celebration. That's the context of the Gemara there. So the Gemara goes through different things that have to do with Marit Ayin, or things that have to do with helping others do things against the Torah with your things, right? So you're not to make business with those that will use it for Avodah Zarah later on, etc. So that's the context here. So in Daf Tetvav, it discusses those kinds of things. Tnan Beit Shammai אומרים, לא ימכור אדם פרה חורשת בשביעית ובית הלל מתירים, מפני שיכול לשוחטה. Am I allowed to sell cow, bull, right? Am I allowed to sell them during Shmita? On the one hand, if I sell it on Shmita, what will happen? He'll take it and forgetting the words, what? And plow, yes, and plow the field with the cow. So once again, I'm helping him do an isur, right? In that sense. Yes. You can see in Rashi. Rashi answers your question. Rashi is aware that this is not so clear. Right? Beit Hillel matirin. Why? Because who knows? Maybe he'll shacht it. Now the question is, who knows? Maybe is that a good enough reason to allow it? Right? They say he probably needs it to plow, but he could shacht it. Right? By the way, just parentheses, in their days, most of that kind of cattle was used for plowing, not for shachting. Nowadays, it's the opposite, right? Most of our cattle is not used for plowing. Definitely ours. I mean, but our neighbors, but right. So that's why the assumption. So on the one hand, the assumption is that it's going to be used for plowing, for work, but it could be used for eating. Amaraba hatam en adam etzuvel shvitat beimto b'shvi'it. Interesting. Okay. As opposed to what? As opposed to Beit Shammai's opinion regarding sorry, when it comes to Behemah, it's not only Beit Shammai. Behemah is a pasuk, right? Like, Beit Shammai, we'll get to Beit Shammai later on. But right, right, the cattle has to not work on Shabbos either. Beseder. Amala Abaye v'kol hechad adam etzuveh asur. Is that a good enough rule? Is that rule a true one? V'arei sadeh da'adam etzuveh al shvitat sadeh b'shvi'it. Sorry. Utnan Beit Shammai omrim lo yimkor adam sadeh nir b'shvi'it v'et hillel matirim k'nei sheyachol lehovira. You're going to sell a field, and who knows what he's going to do with it. So once again, even though, let's at the moment say, the relationship between your cattle and Shmita is not quite as direct and strong as the relationship between your land and Shmita, right? Let's suffice it to say that for the moment, right? So Rabba's rule that says, we're going to have to understand what that means exactly, right? Does that mean, but Abaye counters and says, we see that there's no distinction, according to Beit Hillel, between the cow and the land. מה תקבע רבשי וכל אחד דאין אדם מצווה שרי והרי כלים, דאין אדם מצווה על שביתת כלים בשביעית, ותנן אלו הן כלים שאין אדם מרשה למוכן בשביעית, המחרישה בכל כלה, העול והמזרה והדקר. אלא אמר רבשי, I'm not going to go into all the intricacies here, but the main point is, כל אחד דאי כלמית לתלין אף על גב דין מצווה, כל אחד דאי כלמית ללא תלין אף על גב דין מצווה. The real rule is, if you could say maybe this won't be used for an Isur, you're always allowed to sell it. That's the bottom line in the Gemara here. What's interesting to us, of course, is this very interesting statement by Abaye. אמר לאביי וכל אחד דאדם מצווה אסור, והרי שדה דאדם מצווה על שביתת שדהו בשביעית. Could you say דאדם מצווה על שביתת שדהו בשביעית in the same sense דאדם מצווה on שביתת בהמתו, on Shabbos? On the one hand, there is a pasuk that says, right? It says Simcha lo tizra, but that's you, not the sadeh, right? All right. What about Shabbat haaretz? Shnat Shabbaton yeh la'aretz. So Tosfot says this is not the direction. See Tosfot on page 9. נראה לפרש הטעם אין אדם מצווה על שביתת בהמתו בשביעית, פירוש לפי שאין האיסור תלוי בגוף הבהמה, אלא בגוף הקרקע. Meaning where is the Isur happening? What is what we call the Chefza de Isura, right? What is the Isur? I'd say, how would you phrase this? Let's see a bit more Tosfot, maybe it'll help us refine. Here's a test case, right? There's no relationship between the behema and Shmita. There's no direct relationship between behema and Shmita. There's a direct relationship between land and Shmita. That's what Abaye is saying, according to Tosfot, is like this. You sell a cow, what's he going to do with it? I don't know. Maybe he'll plow, maybe he'll eat. I don't know. So that's true about, says Abaye, that's true about land as well, but there could be a distinction because when you sell a cow, you say, wait, cow is part of the world of Shmita. No, it's not. Cow is not part of the world of Shmita. Land is part of the world of Shmita. But again, I'm being careful in saying part of the world of, right? As opposed to all these, as opposed to Gabei Shabbat, Shaisu Talui B'Guf HaBehema, Ikeiso L'Bali Melchosh Bo Goy. I'm skipping to the last line. Farich Varei Sadeh, just one sec. Shabbat, your cattle isn't allowed to work either. So, what? I said I don't want to go into that intricacy at the moment. So no, it's a fair point about Shabbat, but we said we're putting Shabbat aside and letting Shmita now. Ufarich, I'm in the last line. Tosfot varei sadeh da'adam mitzuvel shvitat sadeu, and here's his test case. Kshehu beyad Yisrael acher yesh bo isur deoraita im zara bo Yisrael. Right, meaning if I sell the cow, right? He says the difference between selling a cow during Shemitah and selling land during Shemitah is that if you were to sell it to a different Jew, is the automatic thing you're allowed to do with it allowed or not? Now, but again, we see the Tosfot is kind of going out of their way to say it's not there's something there's no Isur on the land. It's not the land is forbidden to do anything. It's not the point, right? The point is the relationship between Shemitah and the land is very direct. We see the Tosfots, right, going out of their way to explain that it's that the question is how close sorry, how close are these things related? That seems to be Tosfot's issue. This is very stark contrast to the Ritva and the Tosfot read. Start the Ritva. Amar la'Abaye v'kol echad adam metzuveh mi'asur v'arei sadeh adam metzuveh al shvidat sadeh b'shvit perush v'achad di katarte. Isur de lifnei iver. Kind of ignored lifnei iver because I'm not going into that sugi right now. The isur de sadeh shu metzuveh al shvitata. Right? It's an isur unto itself. It's my job not only to not work during Shemitah, but also to make sure the land gets its rest. That's my job as well. So we see in the Tosfot read, it's an astonishing Tosfot read. How long is the first paragraph and how long is the second? Just a quick, it's about, the second is about a third, less than a third of the first, right? Let's see what he says. Kasha li tuva, I don't understand. We saw Tosfot kind of said, right? Tosfot said, on Shabbat, there's a really sort of deraisa to have your cattle work. On Shmita, the relationship between you and the land is close enough to compare that to, right? But the Tosfot says this doesn't really. They're very different. Why? If I rent my land out and someone else plows it, I've done nothing wrong. But Shmita wise, I've done nothing wrong. Sorry, I said his next line before he did. להשכיר שדה ולגוי בשביתה, אין בו איסור תורה כלל, דלא נסתוו ישראל על שביתת קרקע, אלא שלא יעשו בהם מלאכה. As opposed to שביתת בהמתו בשבת, בין על ידו, בין על ידי גויים, אסור מן התורה. דהרי גם מזריק קרא, למען ינוח שורך וחמוך כמוך. There's a very clear explanation. The goal is that the cattle will be at rest. חייב ליתן לו נייך, שלא יעשה בהם מלאכה אפילו על ידי גויים. וכיוון שנתברר the Shvitat Sadeh B'Shvit Latzmo, right? We've already worked this out, right? That's what Nitbara means, right? So we know the truth now. What's the truth? Shvitat Sadeh B'Shvit is not on the Karka, it's on you. There's no, Shnat Shabbaton Yel Haaretz is only a description of the outcome. It's not a directive, right? How do you compare the two? How can you compare Shvitat Behema to Shvitat Karka? It's very, right, you agree that he elaborated and explained and expressed and proved his point, right? What's his answer? It's all wrong. It's all wrong. Yes, Lomad Shvitat Karka is who's Harnu B'Shvi'it. Rashi, Nafkalan Mishabat Shabbaton Yel Haaretz. Throws the whole thing out. Right? The whole assumption all along was there's no directive regarding the land, it's all about you. And he says, I guess I'm stuck. I have no way to explain the Gemara, so it's my bottom line. Nothing, throw it all out. It must be that, right? It's amazing, right? It's very surprising because he makes he so clearly knows exactly what he's saying until he says, I guess my assumption is wrong.
It basically says,
at what point? In the question. Right. Right. It's not my problem. That's what he's saying.
Yeah. Like we said in the verse, it's just
so the whole assumption says that Shabbaton Yel Haaretz is only a description of what will happen when you don't work. Right? That's his assumption. You agree. I said there are three ways of reading the psukim. So the whole question was assuming the correct way to read the pasuk is Shabbaton Yel Haaretz is only describes if you won't do anything, what's going to happen? It's going to be barren. It's going to happen, right? He says, well, I guess we were wrong. Shabbaton Yel Haaretz is not only description, it's, right? That seems to be the bottom line here. So I agree. The question was this last line over here. Just ignores Shabbaton Yel Haaretz, right? I'm saying it didn't ignore Shabbaton Yel Haaretz. It just says Shabbaton Yel Haaretz means that's the outcome, right? The outcome will be, right? We see this in many places. The Torah describes what will happen when you do this.
But it does raise a question. I don't think it's raised by the you can rent your field out to a goy and it's okay.
So are you allowed to rent your field out? Is it okay? So the Tosfot read seems to assume that it's fine in the question, and once he says the answer, what's going to be the halacha? Why? L'chora, you'll have a problem, right? What? Right, he himself, right, in the first paragraph, he says, "Adei goyim shari," it's mutar, and then in the second paragraph he says, "Asur laskir sedor lagoy b'shvit," right? So the Chazon Ish says there's a machloket, right? You see the Chazon Ish. I only brought a very short paragraph. Oh no, I didn't. Sorry. Let's read the first paragraph and then I'll say something more general ones in the second part. Chazon Ish says the following, bottom of the page, Kavanta Gemara she'isur, bottom of page 9. האיסור של השביתה בקרקע תלויה והעבירה נעשה בקרקע, אבל אם עובד בה נוכרי בשכירות, אין ישראל עובר משום שביתה. Right? That's Tosfot. Right? האיסור של השביתה בקרקע תלויה, it's all, right? Meaning, when the Gemara says that, right, let's just repeat the wording in the Gemara here. Abaye says, "Harei sadeh d'adam etzuva al shvitat sadeh b'shviit." The Chazon Ish shows what we showed in Tosfot, that it was only saying that ha'avira na'asa b'kar, the chefta the isura, right? Where is the isur done? The cow is doing the isur, is helping me do the isur, but there's no inherent connection, relationship between the cow and Shmita, right? We know there's a relationship between Har Sinai and Shmita, right? But the relationship between the cow and Shmita is not so direct, right? The relationship between land and Shmita, that's very direct. But it's a question of how closely related, mimele, how closely do I see you as the one who's causing Isurim to happen if you sell it or rent it out to another Jew? That's all. But it doesn't mean that Shabbat Shabbaton Yelalis means there's anything that's on the land. Now, this is comparable to two other things, right? If we take the Ritva seriously, right? If I have my cattle, I need to make sure that my cattle doesn't work on Shabbat, right? Beit Shammai say this is true not only about cattle, they say about all my possessions, right? You're not allowed to have, of course, Morenu numbers, what was it, 9 and 10, right? Back in the day. Shvitat Kelim, you're not allowed to allow your possessions to work on Shabbat, either according to Beit Shammai, don't worry. We hold like Beit Hillel, you're allowed to use a Shabbos clock on Shabbos, etc. According to Beit Shammai, you're not allowed to, right? Because you're causing your possessions to work on Shabbos. So you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that according to Beit Shammai either. Now, the Chazon Ish says, how far are we going to go? Now, the Chora, this would be a machlok between Tosfot and the Tosfot Reed and the Ritva, right? According to Tosfot, the Holy Isur is only on you. That's why Tosfot goes into knots explaining that I don't mean that the land needs to not work during Shemitah. I mean that the relationship between the land and Shemitah is very inherent. That's all. But the Tosfot Reed and the Ritva, right? Let's take the Ritva, very straightforward sentence. Isur d'sadeu shu mitzvah al shvitata, just like your mitzvah al shvitat be'ema. So if you have your animal is carrying your things on Shabbos, before Shabbos, you're supposed to take that off, right? Okay, so what about before Shmita? You need to make sure your land won't grow any fruit during Shmita. So we're going to have to explain something in between, right? We can't go that extreme. Let's see this on the page 10. Miu kashe, don't worry. The Zoom people who didn't hear, Sarah. We're going to repeat it in the Chazon Ish right now. So, Miu kashe, lama ino kere ilanot v'asfichim. L'chora, before Shmita, if we take the Ritva and those read seriously, you should go out of your way and, uproot everything, right? Now, by the way, how do we know it's wrong? Forget, because the minhag isn't, but more obviously. Right, what are they going to eat? Right? It says also says also in the psukim in Bihar as well, right? It says sorry, I'm forgetting the psukim. What? What are you supposed to eat? Fine. But how are you going to eat if everything was uprooted? So obviously we don't really mean that. By the way, we're going to ask a similar question when we get to unit 7, I think. That it says you're not allowed to reap the field. On the other hand, it says you're allowed to, right? Lo tiktso, right? On the other hand, you're allowed to eat. How do you do that? Okay, it must, so lo tiktso must mean something else.
I mean, the Torah says that the v'asat tatfuah l'shlosh hashanim. So that would seem to sound that you don't need to have something growing on the 7th. It's all in the 6th year.
So that's in those psukim, but how do you explain the pasuk Shabbat ha'as lachem lo'chla? U'le'chol et what? The pashtut is that means that you're going to be eating what grows during Shmita, not during the 6th year, right? You see the problem. So that is a fair point. Again, we're gonna go back to that point when it comes to sfichim. Sfichim is a very relevant. Sfichim, you're gonna have to eat what you grew in the 6th year, in the 7th year, and what if that is doraita and what if that is drabanan? We're gonna have to get to that. But that's a very fair point over there. But at least fruit and other things, definitely you're gonna have to eat something during Shemitah because it says in the pasuk, right? You can say maybe we'll all just go full carnivore. It's an option. Then we'll definitely know why you're buying cows. But the pasuk seems to indicate otherwise, right? Very clearly. Says the Chazon Ish, what Sarah said before. Shein shvitat haaretz ki shvitat beimtor, sheteh shovetet melechet adam ba. ויש מקום לומר דווקא בעובד בישראל ולא בעובד בגוי. So he says two things. First of all, what the most, it seems that what you have to say in the end is you'd have to, even if I say that there's a Shnat Shabbaton, it doesn't mean I'm not allowed to allow the land to work at all. It means I'm allowed to have people work in the land. It just means that I have a directive to make sure the land isn't working. See the difference? It doesn't. It's hard to say that that what we're saying is the land is not allowed to work because the land will grow something. Right? Now, once we say that, I can say, so it's the directive to make sure the land doesn't work by anyone, not for me, not for another Jew. You see how he's slowly taking the Tosfot read and making it right less extreme than we thought. Right? Although he does concede, meaning there are Balei Tosafot, Tosfot Reed says as well, but Tosfot Reed and Chanan, they both say what we saw over there. I'm just going to read that last line that Yonatan pointed out in the last paragraph for the Tosfot Reed. Why? Because I need to make sure the guy doesn't work there, right? So you can't say, right, again, what's the Chazon Ish doing? He says, look, we know you can't say that when I say Shabbat Haaretz, we mean that the land is not going to do anything, just like my cattle isn't supposed to do any work. That's impossible, right? All right. So what is it? So it must be that people won't work the field and cause the field to work. Okay. Define people. Maybe when I say people, I only mean when Jews aren't allowed to make that happen because the Easter is on them. And then maybe I'll say, I have responsibility over my land, also if other Jews might work there. Fine. But why goyim? Okay. On the other hand, good question. Except Tosfot Reed, Tosfot Reed and Chanan do say that explicitly. So it's kind of hard to escape that, right? Aval Barambam, before we read this before we see the Chazon Ish, let's see the two halachot in the Rambam. The Rambam, before every halacha, wrote the list of mitzvot he's going to be discussing in the halachot. In the opening of the Shmita ve'ovel, he writes, Aleph, shetishbot haaretz b'shvit b'melachta. What does that mean? What does that mean? Haaretz. Are people mentioned in the halacha at all? There's no mention of people, right? Shetishbot haaretz. Right? Mitzvat aseh, that the land won't work. Right? Right? Bet shelo yavod, who? The person, right? Avodat haaretz b'shana zo, gimel shelo yavod avodat eilan. Again, the person. Dal shelo yiktzor safiach, kederech hakotzrim. This is again. Lo yiktzor kederech hakotzrim. What is derech hakotzrim? What is not? So we'll get to there. Lo yiktzor nizir kederech habotzrim. So we have 5 separate melachot, 5 separate mitzvot. 4 of them are isurim that are imposed on the person, and 1 is directed at the land. Now, of course, when you say the land, it doesn't mean the land is to do anything. The land is not human. Doesn't have its own free will. Obviously, it's referring to what we're allowed to make the land do, beseder, but it's still phrases directive on the land, just like in the pasuk, right? If you read the pasuk the way I read before, that's just the outcome. It's not a mitzvah. An outcome isn't a mitzvah, right? What we would have said is the mitzvot are, right? Bet gimel daled and hey. What about aleph? It's not a mitzvah. That's the outcome. That's maybe what it looks like. That's, and then you can say lots of true and interesting droshot about that, but it's not a mitzvah. It's not an obligation to itself. It won't have halachic ramifications. It's interesting that in the halachot, at least this first halacha, we're going to see later on, it's not so pashut. When the Rambam expresses this at the opening of the halachot themselves, he writes mitzvot aseh, and again, how many mitzvot aseh are there pertaining to this part of Shmita? How many mitzvot aseh? Only one, right? Only the first mitzvot aseh. The next four are lavim, right? Or yisurim. So when he says mitzvot aseh, obviously he's referring to the first one. What is the mitzvot aseh? Lishbot me'avodat haaretz ve'avodat ha'olam b'shana hashvi'it. So now you're asking a different question of, it's a broader question many places when we have lava b'miklal aseh. In other words, when the mitzvah is to refrain from something, right? It sounds more like an isur, right? Because you're refraining. That's what refraining means, right? Presumably, it's a good question in this context. I think it's easier to explain. We're going to go deeper into the Rambam, not here, right? No, we're going to go deeper into the Rambam, not here. But we'll see later on that I'll just say one small nafkamina, the difference between, right, bet gimel daled hey as opposed to aleph, right? It sounds like, if I phrase it like this, that it's all about the person, lishbot, who's shovet, me'avodat haaretz. Lishbot me'avodat haaretz. Who's that directed at? The person, not the land, right? As opposed to in the kotelet, right, where it's lishbot haaretz, directed at the land, right? We'll see later on the nafkamina lemaise between bet gimel daled and hey and aleph is other melachot. This is similar to what we learned about Kedushim Tiv. This is also similar to the mitzvah of Shabbaton on Shabbos. If you remember, those who were in Shabbat number 34 or 5, the Ramban says, are you allowed to go shopping on Shabbos? Okay. Doraisa or Drabanan? Drabanan, right? Kinyan is Drabanan on Shabbos. Right? Says the Ramban that if you have your shop, if you're going shopping, if you have the marketplaces open, if you're running a market on Shabbos, then you're over on an aseh of Shabbaton. You shouldn't look surprised. You should remember this. Not everyone was here. Why? Sorry? Oh, that's why it's surprising. The Ramban makes the distinction between all the lavim are very, very specific. If you separate things on Shabbos, that itself is isur d'oraisa regardless of the context. The mitzvot aseh, the mitzvot aseh that imply lavim, like Shabbaton, have to do with the context and what we're trying to achieve. So we're trying to achieve Shabbaton. Now, if I receive one present on Shabbos in a way that's asur, so I was over in Isur Drabanan. I didn't destroy Shabbaton. But if you're running a marketplace, if you're running your business on Shabbos, then you're transgressing Shabbaton. You're ruining the Shabbaton of Shabbos. So too, we'll see, many Achronim explain the same in the Rambam here as well. That Bet Gimel Daled and Hey all say, if I go, Daled and Hey are more difficult, but if I go and I plant one seed, that's an Isur d'oraisa. I plant one seed on Shmita, it's an Isur d'oraisa. But if I do all kinds of other melachot that are not listed here, that are only asur midrabanan, if I do one, it's Isur d'oraisa. If I do all of them, and I'm working my field, then I'm transgressing Shvitat Haaretz d'oraita. Right? I hope that answers your question of how is that, I think it gives us a bit of an idea. I'll just, mamash, kemareh makom mulo, I'll just say in one word, Kedushim Tiyu. the Ramban like the Shimtiyu says a similar idea of what does that mean, right? So those who got it, that didn't, we can talk after. Let's go back to the Chazon Ish. You see the Rambam, Barambam Perek Aleph in the last two lines of the Chazon Ish, that's right above the Rambam. Barambam Perek Aleph Alach Aleph Mevor Deina Siddur Shvita Al Baalim Ela Al Haaretz Va'oved Over Ba'aseh Avol Al Baalim. Right? Mitzvah Taseh Lishbot Ma'avodat Haaretz Va'avodat Ha'elan B'Shana Shvit. The Rambam, he wrote Shbot Haaretz in the headline, as it were, but in the halacha itself, he wrote, it's on you, lishbot, ma'avodat haaretz. It's not mitzvah to say shetishbot haaretz. The Rambam knows very well to say shetishbot haaretz, if had he wanted to say that, and not lishbot. How do I know he knows how to say it? Right, the Rambam in the halachot wrote, mitzvah to say lishbot ma'avodat haaretz. Had he wanted to say otherwise, what would he write? Mitzvah to say shetishbot haaretz. Right? How do I know the Rambam knows how to write that? Sorry?
You just did.
Because that's what he wrote, right? Exactly. In the Koteret, that's the way he wrote in the Koteret, right? In the list of the mitzvot he's going to be discussing. Beseder. So the question is, how seriously do you take the Koteret, which sounds more like the Tosfot read, as opposed to the halacha, which sounds more like Tosfot? So? All right. So to sum up, from the Gemara in Avodah Zarah seems to say that there's an inherent connection between Shmita and the Haaretz. You're going to say, that sounds a bit of I'd say very redundant, right? There's a relationship between, the inherent connection between the land and Shmita, no, right? But when you see Tosfot goes into knots to say, to explain that we mean that there's an inherent relationship, but not more than that, as opposed to Tosfot read, who starts there and says, well, bottom line in the end, if I need to compare Shvitat Behemah and Shvitat Haaretz, we have to say that it means that you need to make sure the land doesn't work, and that could have a halachic implication, as he says, to give it to a goy. There would also be a problem, presumably. So now I'm just saying, Mr. Grimes, is there a difference between selling to a goy or renting out to a goy? So it could be that it's only my responsibility, and it's the other way around. Is it my responsibility to buy all the land before Shmita? Forget Heter Mechir. Let's do the opposite. Do I have a responsibility to buy all the land before Shmita in order to make sure that no one works it? Now, we could have gone that extremely. The Chazon Ish says that obviously not, right? If that were true, we'd say the same about presumably that would be the right comparison between that and Shvitat Behemah, right? Again, Shvitat Behemah is my Behemot, but Eretz Yisrael is all Am Yisrael's, right? In that sense, it could be that if the Goyim own the land, it's just not my problem. It could be also for the Jews, it's not my problem any more than and Goyim doing Yisurim in general, which is a problem. But Jews do Yisurim, but so the but the question is, what I'm not sure that's true. You're taking that from Vesh Makol Davka Boved Beisrael? No, because that there he's on the Rambam. There he's back to the Rambam who says like Tosfot.
So even though the mitzvah on the land, the work but he goes on to say that they must
right, the Rambam, that's the way, that's the way the Rambam, that's how he wants to, that's his proposed resolution between Shetishbot Haaretz B'Shvid B'Mlachta and Mitzvah Taseh Lishbot B'Avodat Haaretz. He says, the chiyuv is for me to make sure that I don't work the Haaretz. I agree it's a bit kacha, but on the other hand, there's a clear contradiction in the Rambam, so we have to do, But he says this follows Tosfot, not Tosfot. He said that explicitly next line, right? So we see the Rambam explains like Tosfot based on that explanation, right? In other words, this is Tosfot in the Rambam, but Tosfot read in the Ritva, right? They'd say what we said before. Now again, how far? Obviously, as we said, obviously, we're not required to start uprooting all our land or all our fruit and all everything, right? Obviously. But there is something that we have to make sure, right? There is something beyond that. The nafkamina The clear nafkamina that the Tosfot says at the end, Asur laskir sadeu lagoy b'shvit. So this was a machloket later on in the poskim. Jump over to the Maharit. Imutar laskir la'akum lagoy, page 10. Right after the Rambam. Imutar laskir lagoy sadeu nirid ba'avla shari. אף על פי שבשנת שביעית עצמה לא שייך עוולה, מכל מקום שהזכיר לו ל7 שנים ב700 זוז שרי, כיוון שהזכיר לו שנים מרובות. אורחא דמילתא הוא שאינה זורה שנה אחר שנה בשם התכחישנא. The bottom line, I need to say, the bottom line in the Gemara is that you're not allowed to rent it out for Shmita itself. The question is, does that, if even to a goy, are you allowed to sell it? It's not a sugya. But even to a goy, you're not allowed to rent it out to a guy. But says the Maharit, who agrees with his father, the Mabit, who say you're allowed to rent it out for many years, even though he probably won't be working it on Shmita. It's my land is being worked on Shmita. What do Chazal say about renting your cow out over Shabbos? That even if you rent it out on Sunday, comes Friday, you have to mafkir the cow. So it won't be yours on Shabbos. If it's your cow, it's not allowed to work on Shabbos, even though it's by them. The Maharit says, as long as it's not Bavla, the problem is only the Marit Ayin of you're giving your land to someone else to work on Shmita. Of course, you're going to say, well, what happened? Heter Mechira is much worse, right? So again, we'll get to that. But the Maharit says, the issue is only a Marit Ayin of I'm giving it to someone else to work during Shmita. It doesn't look good. But if I rent it out earlier, a few years earlier, and it's not explicitly for Shmita, it's not a problem at all. The Netziv says, how can you say this? Like it says in Avodah Zarah. This, of course, follows who? The Rit of Tosfot Rabbeinu Elchanan, right? Who all said, well, you have to compare Shvitat Behemah and Shvitat Haaretz to each other, right? Which is, and the Maharit is following Tosfot, right? Who went out of his way to say it's not quite the same. One last nafkamina to all this is Amira Legoy. So the two famous cases of Amira Legoy. Where's Amira Legoy Asur? Telling a guy to do something for you. The two famous cases. The most famous one is, I mean, as a halachic category of Amir al-Goy. Shabbos, right? As a I didn't mean specific one, maybe, but Shabbos, right? Shabbos is you're not telling a guy to do your Shabbos work for you. What's the second one? It's less famous. It's only if you remember the Gemara in the Metzia Daf Tzadi. The Gemara there asks, you don't remember the Gemara? Come on. The Gemara there asks, that's brought in unit number 1 of Moraine, of Shabbos Moraine. The Gemara there asks, am I allowed to have my goy, tell my goy, take this cow, thresh, is that the right word? Ladush. The thresh, the
thresh.
Yeah, the thresh. Okay, thank you. To block its ability to eat while it's doing it. Right? I'm not allowed to do it. I'm allowed to tell a guy to do it. The Gemara asks. Right? So the Gemara discusses Shabbos is a different. Say Tosfot something very interesting. Hachadei Sulav Shari Tosfot in Daf Tzadi, it's on page 11. Afal Gad Masad Moed Katan Amrin the B'Shvid v'Cholo Shel Moed Asur L'Goy. Hata Mishum Dehavat Ve'Yontov Chadamildei v'Gazru Atu Shabbat. So Shabbat, Chol Moed, Shmita, they're all the same. You're not allowed to tell a goy to work your land. You're not allowed to tell a goy to work at all during Shabbat or Chol Moed. Chol Moed is a complicated sugya. What's the most surprising aspect of this? How come not a so not a good b'shvit?
You said it was okay to rent the field out for him to go.
What?
No?
No, rent the field out and he does the work. It's for his own crop, right?
Oh.
But hold on, but it's the other way around. Shnia. You're forgetting the most surprising part. What's the most surprising part of this? For those who know me and know my pages, what's the most surprising aspect of all this? I'll start from, okay, first I'll explain what's the Chidush in Tosfot. Forget the Chidush in Tosfot. Tosfot says that in Moed Katan Daf Yud Bet it says, Shvi'it, there's an Isur of Amira Legoy. Amira Legoy on Shabbos. What kind of Isur is that? Drabanan. So if Shmita is like Shabbat, so the Isur to tell a Goy to go work my field on Shmita is, does that work with the Ritva and the Tosfot read?
No, because they're talking about the land.
Right. So if I tell the Goy work my land on Shmita, I'm doing Isur D'Oraisa. According to Tosfot read, right? The Ritva and Tosfot read, right? It's not Amira Legoy. And it has nothing to do with Amira Legoy. Amira Legoy on Shabbos is a Gzeira because if he does it, I'll do it. If he does it, Zilzul, all those things. Shmita, it says nothing, it's not with Zilzul, and you have that. I'm not allowed to have my land work on Shmita. There's no connection between the Amira Legoy on Shmita and the Amira Legoy on Shabbos, according to the Ritva and Tosfot read. According to who is there a connection? Tosfot. So Tosfot works out with Tosfot. Okay, so that's fine. But it's important to point that out. Now, having said, so that's what's interesting about Tosfot. Now I want you to point out what's the more interesting aspect of this paragraph. Those who don't know me very well will miss it. But Zev, I expect you to. Beseder. I don't think it's a good question, but that's also not the most surprising aspect. This is based on what? What I said just now is based on the Tosfot brings from Moed Katan Daf Yud Bet, Amrin b'Shvit v'cholo shel Moed asur amira legoy. So based on this sentence, I say, if indeed there's a relationship between Shvi'it and cholo shel Moed asur amira legoy, right? That'll make it drabanan. That'll make it in the world of zilzul. Make it in the chashashot. Not in the world of you're not allowed to have your land work on Shmita, right? So it's the most surprising aspect of this, that I didn't bring the Gemara in Moed Katan. No? How do I bring Tosfot without bringing the Gemara that Tosfot's referring to? What's the answer? Right, there's no such Gemara. There's no such Gemara. So Tosfot added the word. It's true that the Gemara in Moed Katan Yud does discuss Amira Legoy on Chol HaMoed. This is true. But it has nothing to do with Shmita. Okay, so just interesting. Now, so the Maharshal says there's a double mistake. Tosfot makes two opposite mistakes here. Number one, there's no such Gemara. Number two, it's not there's no such Gemara because there's no such Isur, Ella, there's no such Gemara because the Isur is far worse. It's not an Amira Legoy like on Shabbos. It's Isur D'Oraisa of working your land on Shmita. See this Chomat Shlomo in the next part. First of all, there's no such discussion in all Masad Moed Katan. Believe me, I'm the Maharshal. I know Moed Katan forwards and backwards by heart. It's not there. I can't say that, the Maharshal. Right? Number two, בוודאי אסור אמירה לגוי בשביעית. אפילו אם תאמר שמותר בשבת. לפי שהשביעית תלה השם יתברך קדושה בארץ. דכתיב שבת שבתון יהיה לארץ. לכן אני אומר שאתה סופר בין שבת לשביעית, it's a mistake. שבת לכל המועד אסור אמירה לגוי, not. So? Beseder. So, right. So what I want to show here is Tosfot is assuming there's nothing on the Aretz. It's all a Drabanan thing. You don't have a goy work your field on Shmita. It's all Drabanan, like on Shabbos, like on Chol HaMoed. Right? Is there such a Gemara? Not Loida. But let's set that aside. But it seems Tosfot, the Shitatam, are saying Shabbat is comparable to Chol HaMoed and Shmita when it comes to Amira Legoy. No? And Marshal says, forget the question of the source, just in terms of the discussion itself. That's an Isur D'Oraisa. It's not Isur D'Rabbanan, right? Let's finish off with the Minchat Chinuch here. Dad Shvit binyan echad chamur mishabat v'yom tov. De b'shabat ika Isur ala oseh melacha v'atzmo. V'ledei goy הוא רק שבות. ובשמיטה, אם עושה עבודת הארץ, כגון שחורש שדה או זורע או קוצר על ידי גוי, נידע לא תעשה של עבודת הארץ אינו, he doesn't transgress, סדך לא תזרע וקרנך לא תזמור. Sorry, I'm saying their sentences. This directive at the person, at the individual. over בכל עבודת קרקע, אפילו לידי אחרים. יכתיב שבת שבתון יהיה לארץ, ושבתה הארץ. מבוא גזרת הכתוב, הארץ תשבות. כמו שמצווים לשביתת כלים בבית שמאי, שביתת בהמה בשבת, כן מוזרים לשביתת הארץ בשמיטה. והמזכיר לגוי או לישראל השדה, עובר המזכיר משום שביתת שדהו, אם כי הדברים בעצמם נכונים, ש"ס מפורש הוא. Not only is it logical, Chazal also said it. Right? That's his last line over there. But so the Minchal Chinuch falls squarely into the Ritva Tosat Reed camp, right? The Netziv, yeah, right. Yeah. Right. It's nachon. So if we want to write just to sum up, the Gemara in Avodah Zarah compares the Shvita of the Aretz and Shvita of the Shvita Behemot. It's also got out of their way to say what we mean is that they're both, that's the inherent part of the Isur. In order to avoid saying that I'm obligated to make my land not work. Tosot Rid says, yeah, you're 100% right, except you're wrong, right? It goes on saying that's true, and then he ends up saying, like, except it's not. Ritva just says there are two Isurim, Isur of Lifnever and Isur of allowing your land to work on Shmita. Isur unto itself seems to be implied in the Rambam's Hakdama as well, but when it comes to the Halachot, he seems to deviate, and Chazon Ish says, yes, Rambam is like Tosfot. Clarification of this is renting the field out to a goy, which once again falls in the same machloket, right? The Marit and the Mabit take this, say that there's no Isur that a goy will work my field, and then the Siv says, of course there is, just like the Ritva and Tosfot Reed, same as the Marshal, same as the Minchat Chinuch. As opposed to Tosfot, it seems to say that Amira Legoy, that's their nefkamina, the Marshal and the Minchat Chinuch, Amira Legoy, Isur Duraisa, according to them. And Tosfot seems to say it's only an Yisur Drabanan. I will point out this comparison between Shvitat Behema and Shvitat Haaretz, Shvitat Kelim and Shvitat Haaretz, means that on Shabbos, before Shabbos, according to Beit Shammai and regarding Kelim and the Kula Alma, when it comes to my cattle, etc., I need to make sure that when we reach Shabbos, they're not working, right? Do we have a similar thing on Shmita? Even before Shmita, I have to make sure that things aren't working during Shmita? Don't answer the question yet, because most of Unit 2 discusses that question.